The clock struck midnight as Jane Grey stood outside room 701 of the Cyrus Hotel, her hands trembling as she clutched a manila folder. Her brother Gary had sent her here to deliver an important file, but something felt deeply wrong. The air was thick with an inexplicable tension, and the dimly lit corridor seemed to stretch endlessly before her. Room 701. This is it, Jane whispered to herself, her voice barely audible in the empty hallway. She knocked once, twice. The door swung open abruptly, and before she could react, strong hands pulled her inside with surprising force. "Who sent you here?" a deep male voice demanded in the darkness. Jane's heart pounded against her ribcage. "My brother sent me to deliver a file. Please let me go." The man's laugh was bitter and cold. "Quit the act. Aren't you here to deliver yourself to me?" "What are you talking about?" Jane's confusion quickly turned to panic as an overwhelming heat began coursing through her body, starting from her core and spreading to her limbs. Her skin felt like it was on fire. "I feel so hot." The man's voice changed, softening with what sounded like genuine concern. "You've been drugged." Jane's vision blurred as the room began to spin violently. She reached out, trying to steady herself, but her legs gave way beneath her. The last thing she remembered was the sensation of strong arms catching her as she fell, and then, darkness consumed her completely. Through the haze of the drug, Jane was dimly aware of sensations. Warmth, closeness, whispered words she couldn't quite make out. The night passed in a fever dream of confusion and heat. When Jane's eyes fluttered open the next morning, harsh sunlight pierced through unfamiliar curtains, making her wince. She bolted upright, immediately regretting the sudden movement as her body protested with a wave of aches. She stared at the empty space beside her in the disheveled bed, the reality of what had happened crashing over her like a tidal wave. "How could I sleep with a stranger?" she gasped, clutching the expensive sheets to her chest. These weren't the thin, worn sheets from her tiny room at the Grey Mansion. Everything about this room screamed luxury, from the silk curtains to the marble bathroom visible through an open door. "My family will kill me if they hear about this." She frantically searched for her clothes, her mind racing with questions that had no answers. Who was that man? Where had he gone? And most importantly, what had Gary done to her? The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her own brother had drugged her and sent her to a stranger's room. Jane dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with buttons and zippers. She found her phone on the nightstand, the screen showing dozens of missed calls from her mother. Her stomach dropped. She was late, very late, and Mrs. Grey's wrath was legendary. The Grey family mansion loomed before Jane as she approached with heavy steps, each one feeling like she was walking toward her own execution. The grand estate, with its pristine white columns and manicured gardens, had never felt like home. It was a cage dressed in marble and gold. She had barely crossed the threshold when her mother's shrill voice pierced the air like a blade. "Where did you go last night? I told you I need warm milk every morning. Did you take me seriously?" Jane bowed her head respectfully, knowing that any sign of defiance would only make things worse. "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't get home in time to prepare it." Mrs. Grey's face contorted with rage, her perfectly made-up features twisting into something ugly. "You contribute nothing to the family. If you don't even prepare my breakfast, what's the point of having you here?" "Mom, I wake up at 4 every morning to prepare your breakfast. I'm not slacking off. How dare you?" Jane's words were cut short as she realized her mistake. The sharp crack of Mrs. Grey's hand across Jane's face echoed through the foyer. Jane's head snapped to the side, her cheek burning with the impact. "How dare you talk back to me?" From the doorway, Lillian Grey appeared as if on cue. She was dressed in an expensive designer outfit, her makeup flawless, her expression perfectly crafted into concerned innocence. "Calm down, Mom. I'll go shopping with you later." Mrs. Grey's demeanor transformed instantly, her face softening as she looked at Lillian. "Now that's what I need. You're such a good daughter." Jane watched the exchange with a familiar ache in her chest. No matter what she did, she would never receive that kind of warmth from the woman who had given birth to her. "I'll head to my room," Jane said quietly, hopping to escape before things escalated further. "Wait, Jane," Mrs. Grey's voice stopped her cold. Her mother's eyes narrowed as she studied Jane more closely. "You slept with someone." Jane froze, her hand instinctively moving to her neck, where she knew marks must be visible. "No wonder you didn't come home last night," Mrs. Grey continued, her voice dripping with disdain. Mr. Gray emerged from the dining room, his newspaper forgotten, his expression darkening. "Jane, are you dating someone?" Lillian stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with malicious curiosity as she examined Jane's neck. "Mom, look, Jane has hickeys all over her neck." Her voice was sugar-sweet, but her eyes were cold. "Jane, when did you start dating? Even if you're really close to him, you shouldn't have slept with him so soon." "It's not like that," Jane began, but her words fell on deaf ears. "Jane, why are you so shameless?" Mrs. Gray spat, her disgust evident. "Can't you live a day without a man touching you?" "Jane, who are you dating? What is his background? You better tell me everything or I will kill you," Mr. Gray threatened, advancing toward her with his fist raised. Jane's younger brother Ken descended the stairs, his celebrity-handsome face twisted with contempt. "Can you really blame her, though? She grew up in the countryside with those peasants. Of course she doesn't know how to behave properly." The words strung more than the slap had. Jane had been raised by her grandmother in a small village until she was 18, when the Greys had suddenly decided they wanted her back. She had thought it was because they had missed her that they finally wanted to be a family. How naive she had been. Jane's mind raced back to the previous day, trying to make sense of what had happened. "Gary, who was the man you sent me to deliver the file to yesterday?" Her older brother Gary, who had been standing silently in the corner, finally spoke. He had an odd smile on his face, one that made Jane's blood run cold. "The day before." Gary had returned home with an unusual spring in his step. "Jane, come here." Jane had looked up from the kitchen where she was preparing the evening meal. Despite being the biological daughter of the family, she was treated worse than a servant. "Gary, you're back. Mom and Dad finished the food I cooked." "It's okay, I'll cook more," she had offered quickly, already mentally calculating if there were enough ingredients for another meal. "It's okay, I had my lunch outside," Gary had replied, his tone uncharacteristically kind. It should have been her first warning sign. "By the way, I'll be busy later, so I need you to deliver this file for me." Jane's heart had actually warmed at being asked to help. Maybe she had thought her brother was finally starting to see her as family. "Sure." "That's so kind of you. The address is written inside," Gary had said, handing her the folder. "Okay, I'll head over now." Gary had placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, the first kind touch he'd given her in months. "Don't rush it, take your lunch first. I don't want you to starve." Jane had felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected kindness. "Eating is not as important as your task." "At least drink this glass of milk," Gary had insisted, pressing a glass into her hands. Jane had stared at the milk, then at her brother's face. For a moment she had seen genuine concern there, or so she thought. "This is the first time he's ever been so kind to me," she had thought, accepting the glass gratefully. She had drunk it quickly, eager to help her brother and prove her worth to the family. "Catch you later, Gary." "Stay safe," he had called after her with what she now realized was mock concern. But the milk had been drugged, carefully, deliberately drugged, and the address had been wrong, intentionally wrong. Gary had sent her to room 701 instead of room 1101, where Mr. Harry Fry, a wealthy and twisted businessman, had been waiting. Back in the present, Gary's expression had shifted from false concern to cold calculation. "Jane, you're not young anymore. As your brother, I had to consider your future. Mr. Fry has a high status. You should be glad you're marrying him." The words hit Jane like a physical blow. "Gary, what do you mean by that? You didn't plan to make me sleep with him and then marry him, did you?" "I think it's time you know the truth," Gary said calmly, as if discussing a business transaction rather than his sister's fate. "We've been working with him for some time now, but the projects were all minor. As long as you marry him, our collaboration will achieve new heights." Jane felt bile rise in her throat. "Gary, you want me to marry a stranger just because of a project?" Mrs. Gray stepped forward, her expression hard as granite. "Jane, we've raised you for many years. Don't you think you should repay us?" The word repay hung in the air like a curse. Jane had spent the last few years doing nothing but repaying them, cooking, cleaning, serving, sacrificing her education, her dreams, her dignity. And now they wanted her to sacrifice her future, her body, her very soul. "I don't want to marry him," Jane said firmly, surprising even herself with the strength in her voice. Gary pulled out his phone, his smile turning sinister as he tapped the screen a few times. "Let me be frank with you. Mr. Fry has recorded the entire process last night. If you don't marry him, we'll post it online. Then your image will be tarnished forever. you'll be ruined." Jane felt the room spin, a recording of her most vulnerable moment. "You wouldn't." "Try me," Gary said coldly. At that moment, Mr. Fry himself burst through the door, his aged face contorted with rage. He was a man in his 60s, his expensive suit unable to hide his cruel nature. "Mr. Gray, she was really here to deliver a file. I waited in room 1101 for hours, yet no one showed up." The Gray family froze. Gary's face went pale. "What did you say, room 1101? "Yes, room 1101. Wasn't that the room you told me?" Mr. Fry snarled. I said room 1101, Gary stammered, pulling out the message he'd sent Jane. His eyes widened in horror. "But I wrote 1701 in the note." Lillian's eyes lit up with malicious glee. So Jane didn't go to Mr. Fry's room at all. Then whose room did she enter? The question hung in the air, unanswered and ominous. Before anyone could process this revelation, the sound of multiple vehicles pulling up outside drew everyone's attention. The roar of expensive engines and the synchronized slamming of car doors suggested this was no ordinary visitor. The massive front doors burst open with such force that they banged against the walls. Bodyguards in perfectly tailored black suits filled the entrance hall, moving with military precision. The Gray family had money, yes, but this level of power and coordination suggested something far beyond their reach. "Mrs. Bale Sr. and Mr. Bale," the head bodyguard announced in a voice that commanded absolute attention. An elegant elderly woman entered, moving with the grace of royalty despite her age. She wore a simple but obviously expensive dress, and her presence alone seemed to fill the room with warmth and authority. But it was the man beside her who made everyone's breath catch. Hans Bale was devastating. Tall, with features that seemed carved from marble, he wore a perfectly fitted suit that emphasized his powerful build. But it was his eyes that captured attention, cold and dangerous as they scanned the room until they landed on Jane. In that instant, they softened with an emotion no one could quite identify. "How dare you play tricks with me?" Mr. Fry snarled at Gary, his earlier rage returning. "Just you wait. I'll make sure Gray Court pays for this humiliation." Mrs. Gray's eyes widened in recognition and fear. "Harry, she didn't go to your room." "Where did you go last night, Jane?" Mr. Gray demanded, his voice rising with each word. Ken, who had been silently observing, finally spoke up. "Wait, Harry Fry. Dad, you're not talking about the leader of Fry Inc., are you?" His celebrity face had gone pale. "I heard that he has a twisted mind due to infertility, so he abuses young women for sport and has even killed 2 of them." Jane's knees nearly buckled as the full horror of what her family had planned for her sank in. "Gary, not only did you want me to marry an old guy, but he's also a psychopath." "Jane, don't blame Gary," Mrs. Gray said, her tone almost reasonable, which made it even more chilling. "He did it for your own good. Well, even though Mr. Fry's older men dote on young women, it's just that Mr. Fry has a bit of a kink. Also, it's good that he's infertile because you won't get pregnant." The casual way her mother discussed signing her death warrant made Jane's stomach turn. "Since Harry's such a good option, why don't you marry him yourself?" Jane shot back, her patience finally snapping. Lillian gasped dramatically. "Jane, I'm just telling the truth. I heard it's very painful to give birth. I'm just happy for you that you won't have to suffer." "How dare you talk to Lily like that?" Mrs. Gray shrieked. "Apologize to her right now." "Was I wrong, though?" Jane's voice grew stronger. "Since Harry's such a good guy, why don't you marry him instead?" "We can't have Lily marry that psychopath," Mr. Gray said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Then why are you making me marry him?" The question was simple, but it laid bare the ugly truth of how they saw her. "Don't compare yourself to her," Mrs. Gray said coldly. Before the argument could continue, Mrs. Bale Sr.'s commanding voice cut through the chaos like a knife through silk. "Don't you dare hurt her." The Gray family turned as one to see the elderly woman and the impossibly handsome man striding toward Jane with purpose. Hans Bale positioned himself protectively in front of her, his tall frame blocking her from her family's view, as his grandmother gently reached around him to touch Jane's tear-stained face. "Oh, poor thing, are you okay? Don't be afraid, I'm his grandma. We're here to take you home," Mrs. Bale Sr. said, her voice so full of genuine warmth that Jane felt tears spring to her eyes. Mr. Gray, never one to read a room correctly, stepped forward aggressively. "I see you are the man she slept with last night. How dare you come up to us? Where are the bodyguards? What are they doing?" Tie this dirty couple and the old hag up right now." The words had barely left his mouth when the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The bodyguards moved, but not to obey Mr. Gray's command. "You should go," Jane whispered urgently to Hans, her voice breaking. "I don't want to get you involved. This is my problem." Hans didn't even look at her as he responded, his eyes fixed on Mr. Gray with an intensity that made the older man step back. "Don't worry, we won't let them bully you." "Don't be afraid, child," Mrs. Bale Sr. added, squeezing Jane's hand. "We won't let them hurt you anymore." As Mr. Gray lunged forward, emboldened by rage and stupidity, the bodyguards moved to intercept. But one of them deliberately hesitated for just a fraction of a second, letting Mr. Gray get close enough to raise his hand toward Hans. The bodyguard's voice thundered through the room. "How dare you try hurting Mr. Bale?" The color drained from every Gray family member's face in perfect synchronization. Even Mr. Fry, who had been ranting in the corner, fell silent. "Mr. Bale," Mrs. Gray whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "Is he who I think he is?" Lillian breathed, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and sudden, desperate hope. "He can't be," Ken said, but his voice lacked conviction. "He can't be the richest man on earth, Hans Bale." The head bodyguard stepped forward, his voice formal and precise. "It's thanks to Mrs. Bale that people like you get to meet Mr. Bale and Mrs. Bale Sr." "Mrs. Bale," the family echoed in confusion, looking around the room as if expecting another person to appear. Mrs. Bale Sr.'s smile was warm, but her eyes were steel as she made her announcement. "That's right. The person you were going to hurt is my future granddaughter-in-law. The day after tomorrow, we Bales will hold an engagement party to announce their wedding." The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the room turned to Jane, who stood frozen in shock, her mind unable to process what she was hearing. Mrs. Bale Sr. extended her hand gently toward Jane, ignoring everyone else in the room. "Jane, are you willing to come with us?" Jane looked at the kind woman before her, then at Hans, whose eyes held an inexplicable intensity, and something else, something that looked almost like reverence. Finally, she looked back at her so-called family who had sold her to a monster without a second thought. For the first time in her life, standing in the ruins of everything she had hoped her family could be, Jane made a choice purely for herself. "Yes," Jane said clearly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm willing." Mrs. Bale Sr. beamed, her entire face lighting up with genuine joy. "Great, let's go." As they turned to leave, Mr. Gray suddenly seemed to realize what was slipping through his fingers. He grabbed Mrs. Gray's arm frantically. "Stop them, we can't let her leave. Do you know who Hans Bale is? He's the richest man on earth." Hans's expression turned glacial, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Beat them up." The bodyguards moved with military precision. In the chaos that followed, screams filled the mansion. Mr. Gray was thrown against a wall, Ken was knocked to the ground, and Mrs. Gray's perfectly styled hair became a mess as she tried to flee. But Hans kept Jane safely behind him, one arm stretched back to ensure she was shielded from the violence, his large hand gently holding hers. "Don't come near me," Mrs. Gray shrieked as a bodyguard advanced toward her. "Stop it," Jane finally cried out, unable to watch despite everything they'd done to her. Her inherent kindness, even toward those who had shown her none, couldn't be suppressed. Hans raised his hand immediately, and the bodyguards froze mid-action. The discipline was impressive and slightly terrifying. "I'm only sparing you because I shouldn't kill on the day Mrs. Bale joins us." As they walked toward the waiting vehicles, Jane heard Gary groan behind them. "Are you okay, son?" Mrs. Gray fussed over him. "What do you think? How can this not hurt?" Mr. Gray whimpered, nursing his bruised face. But Gary's next words made Jane's blood run cold. "It's worth the beating, though. It's worth it because after Jane marries him, I'll be the Bale's in-law. That means we're going to get rich." Mrs. Gray's eyes lit up with greed despite her split lip. "Does that mean we're going to become wealthy?" "Wait, that's right," Mr. Gray said, his pain forgotten as realization dawned. "Hans is the richest man on earth, and I'm going to be his brother-in-law. I can have him pay for me to become the most popular actor. Even a tiny bit of the Bale's assets can give us more than a lavish life." Lillian, nursing her own bruises, couldn't hide the envy in her voice. "I envy Jane so much. Why does she get to marry Hans even when she's so indecent? Why don't I have such a chance?" Mrs. Gray's expression turned calculating. "Lily, do you mean you want to marry Hans?" "That's easy," Mr. Gray said, his business mind already working. "We can make Jane give up on the marriage pact, then you can take her place." "Mom's right," Gary agreed, getting to his feet. "Lily's a better person compared to Jane. She treats us better too. It'll be more beneficial to us for her to marry the Bales." Lillian's eyes gleamed with ambition. "Don't worry, Gary. I'll definitely treat you well after I marry Hans, but what if Jane doesn't agree to it?" "She wouldn't dare," Mrs. Gray said confidently. "Have you forgotten how much of a pushover she's been? She doesn't disobey us. Even after we beat her up, she'd always feel happy as long as we treat her better next time." "Yeah," Ken added, "as long as we let her return to us, she'll be so grateful and give up the marriage pact." "To put it simply," Mr. Gray concluded, "Jane isn't fit to marry someone like Hans, so it's her pleasure for us to allow her to return to our family." "That's settled then," Mrs. Gray said with finality. "Let's get our attire prepared for Lily's wedding the day after tomorrow." Meanwhile, Jane sat in the luxury car between Hans and Mrs. Bale Sr., feeling like she had stepped into an alternate reality. The leather seats were softer than her bed at the Gray mansion. The car itself was larger than her bedroom. "Mrs. Bale's here," a voice announced as they pulled up to an estate that made the Gray mansion look like a cottage. Hans helped both his grandmother and Jane out of the car with careful attention. "Mr. Bale, thanks for saving me," Jane said softly. "We're going to be family soon. You don't have to be so polite," he replied, but his eyes never left her face as if he was memorizing every detail. "No, last night Jane's hand moved to her stomach as a sudden sharp pain cut through her words. The adrenaline that had been keeping her going suddenly crashed. "What's wrong?" Hans was immediately alert, his hand reaching out to steady her. "My belly hurts," Jane gasped, doubling over slightly. "Send her to the hospital. Hurry," Hans commanded, his voice sharp with concern as he helped her back into the car. Mrs. Bale Sr. took Jane's hand, patting it gently. "Don't worry, dear, we'll take care of you." As the car sped toward the hospital, Jane caught a glimpse of the Gray mansion disappearing behind them through the rear window. Inside those walls she had been nothing, a servant, a pawn, a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder or the most useful business partner. She had spent years trying to earn their love, believing that if she just worked harder, was kinder, sacrificed more, they would finally see her as family. But now, sitting between these two strangers who had defended her without hesitation, who looked at her with genuine concern rather than contempt, Jane realized something profound. Family wasn't about blood. It was about who chose to stand beside you when the world turned against you. At the hospital, the doctor examined Jane thoroughly, while Hans paced outside the room like a caged tiger. Mrs. Bale Sr. watched her grandson with knowing eyes. "Doctor, how is she?" Hans demanded the moment the doctor emerged. "She had gastric pain due to long-term malnutrition," the doctor explained, his expression sympathetic. "But not only was her stomach in pain, her lower abdomen was hurt as well." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "Did you have intense intercourse last night?" Hans's jaw clenched. "What do you need to know?" "I might have to prescribe some medicine. How long did it go on for?" "The whole night until daylight," Hans admitted quietly. Mrs. Bale Sr.'s cane hit the floor with a sharp crack. "You bastard, how could you do that? You injured Jane." "I didn't know," Hans began, but his grandmother cut him off. "I don't want to hear excuses. This poor girl has been through enough." After receiving medication and strict instructions for rest, Jane was finally allowed to leave. As they drove toward the Bale estate, Jane stared out the window in silence, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. When they arrived, Jane was overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the property. The mansion was enormous, with manicured gardens that seemed to stretch for miles. Maids lined up at the entrance, and as Jane stepped out of the car, they all bowed in unison. "Greetings, Mrs. Bale," they chorused. "I'm not Mrs. Bale," Jane said quickly, embarrassed by the attention. "You will be Hans's wife very soon," Mrs. Bale Sr. said warmly. "Surely, tell the other maids to greet Mrs. Bale properly." The head maid surely nodded and turned to address the staff. "Come over. Greetings, Mrs. Bale." "Come over, let's eat," Mrs. Bale Sr. said, leading Jane inside. "Come on, have a seat. They can cook more if these aren't enough." Jane stared at the dining table, which was laden with more food than she had seen in months. Every dish looked exquisite, prepared by professional chefs. Why are you frozen? Is it because the dishes don't suit your taste? Mrs. Bale Sr. asked with concern. Guys, throw them away and cook something else. It's not that, Mrs. Bale Sr., Jane said quickly, not wanting to see food wasted. I'm not hungry. You eat first, I'll eat after you do. We're family. Of course we eat together, Mrs. Bale Sr. said, patting the seat beside her. Is it because you don't like me and Hans that you don't want to eat together with us? It's not like that, Jane protested. Shirley stepped forward, her expression sad. Mrs. Bale Sr., after investigation, we found out that Mrs. Bale isn't allowed to eat at the table at home. She can only eat the leftovers using disposable utensils after they finish their meals, and she's forced to reuse the set of utensils. What? Mrs. Bale Sr.'s face darkened with anger. That's too much. Jane felt her cheeks burn with shame. Mrs. Bale Sr., disposable utensils are fine, they don't break. Mrs. Bale Sr. took Jane's hand and pulled her to sit down. Come here and have a seat. She picked up an expensive-looking plate and deliberately dropped it on the floor where it shattered into pieces. It's just a set of utensils. Break them if you want to. We can always give you another set. Here, let's eat. Have a taste of this. As Jane took her first bite, tears threatened to fall. The food was delicious, but what made her chest tight with emotion was the simple act of being welcomed to the table, of being treated like she mattered. Thank you, Jane whispered. Is it good? Do you like it? Mrs. Bale Sr. asked eagerly. Mrs. Bale Sr., this is the best food I've ever tasted. Eat more then, Mrs. Bale Sr. beamed, loading Jane's plate with various dishes. I got you some pretty clothes. Come see if you like them after dinner. After the meal, Mrs. Bale Sr. led Jane to a room filled with designer clothes, shoes and handbags that still had their tags attached. Jane recognized some of the brands. They were the ones Lillian always bragged about wanting. Mrs. Bale Sr., I have my clothes, Jane protested weakly. I hope that you can have the best of everything, Mrs. Bale Sr. said firmly. From now on, I'll have them deliver the latest designs to you every month. Take the bags out too. Maids brought in numerous shopping bags, each containing a luxury handbag that cost more than Jane had earned in her entire life. One particular bag caught Jane's eye. She recognized it because Lillian had received it as a birthday gift from their father on her 18th birthday. Lillian had bragged about it for weeks. I saw Lillian having a bag from that brand as a birthday gift from your dad. It was quite costly and she appreciated it, Mrs. Bale Sr. said, having clearly done her research. It must have cost you a lot to prepare all these. I can't take them. I prepared them for you. Of course you should take them, Mrs. Bale Sr. insisted. Besides, if even your cheap sister has one, you should have more. These are the top designs of the same brand. Your sister will be so pissed if she sees you carrying one. I'm sure you'll be happier with these bags. Despite her protests, Jane found herself accepting the gifts. There was something about Mrs. Bale Sr.'s insistence that made her feel valued in a way she never had before. All right, it's getting late, Mrs. Bale Sr. finally said. Hans, bring her to the room for a rest. Come with me, Hans said, offering his arm. As they walked up the grand staircase, Jane couldn't help but marvel at the paintings on the walls, the crystal chandeliers, the sheer opulence of everything. Hans led her to a massive bedroom suite. This is your room, Jane asked. Our room, Hans corrected. You'll stay here with me. Jane's eyes widened. But we're not really. I mean, this is just a business arrangement, isn't it? Hans turned to face her fully, his expression serious. Jane, I need to tell you something. Last night wasn't an accident on my part. Someone drugged me too, trying to set me up. But when I touched you, something impossible happened. What do you mean? I'm allergic to women, Hans said quietly. Any physical contact with them causes me to break out in severe rashes. It's been that way my whole life. But with you, there was no reaction. You're the only woman I can touch. Jane stared at him, trying to process this information. That's why your grandmother was so insistent about us getting married. Partly, Hans admitted. But I want you to know you don't have to be afraid of me. I won't force you into anything. This marriage can be whatever you want it to be. Before Jane could respond, there was a knock at the door. Shirley entered with an apologetic expression. Mr. Bale, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've received word that the Grey family is spreading rumours. They're claiming that Mrs. Bale is unsuitable for you and that Miss Lillian Grey should take her place. Hans's expression darkened. Let them talk, it won't change anything. After Shirley left, Jane sank down onto the edge of the enormous bed. I'm sorry, I've brought trouble to your family. You've brought nothing but light, Hans said, sitting beside her. Jane, I want to make you an offer. Let's make this marriage real, at least for a year. After that, if you want to leave, I'll let you go with a generous settlement. But for now, let me protect you. Let me give you the life you deserve. Jane looked into his eyes and saw sincerity there, along with something else she couldn't quite name. Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me. Maybe that's exactly why, Hans said. Because I want to know you. Because in one night you've shown me more genuine kindness and vulnerability than anyone has in years. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth protecting. Jane felt tears spill down her cheeks. Okay, 1 year, but I have one condition. Name it. I want to continue my studies. I had to drop out to work at home, but I've always dreamed of finishing my degree. Hans smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. Done, you can start as soon as you'd like. In fact, I'll make sure you have everything you need. As Jane finally settled into bed that night, in a room larger than the entire servants' quarters at the Grey Mansion, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. 24 hours ago, she had been nobody, worse than nobody. She had been a servant in her own family's home, unloved and unwanted. Now she was engaged to the richest man on earth, living in a mansion, and being treated with more kindness than she had experienced in years. It felt like a dream, one she was afraid to believe in too deeply for fear of waking up. But as she drifted off to sleep, Jane couldn't help but feel a small spark of hope igniting in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, her life was finally about to change for the better. Meanwhile, back at the Grey Mansion, the family had finished tending to their wounds and was now gathered in the living room, their minds fixed on one thing: how to get Jane back under their control and claim the Bale fortune for themselves. We need a plan, Mr. Grey said, his bruised face making him look almost comical. Jane is too valuable to lose. I know exactly what we need to do, Lillian said, her eyes gleaming with malicious intent. Jane has always been weak when it comes to family. All we need to do is find her weakness and exploit it. And what would that be? Mrs. Grey asked. Lillian smiled cruelly. Her adoptive grandmother's ashes.